Welcome to this training on Geospatial Web Services. It is 2 sharp and we're supposed to start now, but I would like to suggest that we give our colleagues maybe some until maybe around 5-6 past, and then we start off properly. In the meantime, kindly write your name, your organization and country so that we have that on record. We will be starting shortly. We're all set, we're all good to go. So let's record our details in the meantime. Thank you very much. A very warm welcome to this. Very interesting training on Geospatial Web Services. I am called Anthony Gidudu, and I am an associate professor in the Department of Geomatics and Land Management, and I'm a co-convener of the 6th Advances in Geomatics Research Conference. And this training is proudly sponsored by GMS and Africa, which is a project we have got through the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, RCMRD in Nairobi. And GMS and Africa is a European Union project being administered through the African Union. And the whole idea is to see how we can leverage satellite imagery, geospatial data, to address the various societal challenges that we all face. And so, as we all would probably know and appreciate, we all come from different organizations. We generate spatial data. And one of our biggest hurdles is how we are able to share this data. And so this training has been developed with that in mind, so that we start exploring ways by which we can have data sets that can be shared. And we want to be able to know how we can share that data. And I'm very proud to introduce Mr. Alan Mazimwe, who will be taking us through this exciting journey. So for Monday and Tuesday, the training will be from 2 to 4:30 or 5. And then on Wednesday morning, we shall start at 9 sharp. So it will be from 9 to 12. So bear that in mind. Monday and Tuesday, it will be in the afternoon. On Wednesday, our training will be in the morning. Because we have another pre-conference activity on Wednesday afternoon. And so we have these 3 sessions for over this period of time. I hope you will make the most of this training. I'm looking forward to what Alan has put together. And at this, I would like to mention that the representation from RCMRD could not make it today due to some technicalities, but they will give some opening remarks tomorrow at 2 p.m. So we shall hear from our main funders tomorrow, and we'll hear more about RCMRD. With those few words, and without taking too much of your time, I would like to hand over to Alan to get us rolling. And all the best in this training. I also would like to inform you that for all the participants, we will award you certificates of participation to recognize the time that you'll have invested in this training. So Alan, over to you, and have a great session. Thank you. As we wait for Alan to sort out the technicalities, could you kindly put a register of your attendance, your name, where you're coming from, as well as the country you are coming from? Thank you. Apologies for just a bit of a technical hiccup we are sorting out. We should be on air in the next 2-3 minutes. Thank you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Allow me to start. Okay, I hope you're hearing me. Okay, good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to the pre-conference workshop on spatial data infrastructures and fair data principles. So basically, this pre-conference workshop is going to introduce us to fair data principles, SDIs, as well as geospatial web services. This is our first day, and we are hoping to have 3 days. So in our first day, we have basically content on spatial data infrastructures and fair data principles. So once again, we have 3 sessions. The first session is about spatial data infrastructures and fair principles. And then the next session is about how do we consume web services. And the last one will allow us to be able to implement our own web services. So the idea here is we have a lot of data, but then how do we make sure that we maximize this data and be able to use it for our own projects. So for today's session, we have basically the first session, we have divided it into 2 sessions. So the first session will last approximately 1.5 hours, and the next will also be 1.5 hours. So in today, basically what we want to do is data discovery, evaluation, access. And then also we want to learn about fair principles. Fair principles are relatively new. They are the first workshop on fair principles was in 2014. And in 2016, the first paper on fair principles was written. And in 2018, we had the H20 projects on board. And currently, we have only 1 project in the geospatial domain that's adopting fair principles. So we are learning something pretty new in the geospatial sciences. I have used fair principles somewhere else in my research work, so I think we need it in the geospatial domain already. In the next session of the day, we shall basically work on spatial data infrastructures. So how can we be able to integrate data together? So once again, I'm called Alan Mazimwe, and I'm from the Department of Geomatics and Land Management. And basically, my research interests are in geospatial data. So my research interests are in geospatial data, geospatial data interoperability, and okay. So I need to first do something here, and okay. So my research interests are basically in geospatial data interoperability, and well, I'm trying to play around with the configurations here. So a moment. Okay, then business. So my research interests are in geospatial data interoperability, and I'm completing my PhD studies, maybe at the end of this year in the same. So let's start with data discovery and evaluation, as well as access. You know that spatial data is really very important for our economy. Almost everything that we do is all about spatial data. So you basically need to get this data and manage it. It's very expensive. If you don't manage it, then there are problems. So it's very important for our businesses, no doubt about that. For our society, no doubt about that. And in fact, for most of the institutions that we have here in our country, actually every institution, government institution, or even in other countries, partner countries, every government institution produces data. Somehow they have spatial data, and they have to plan, and they have to work together. So if you don't bring this data together so that you can be able to create spatial plans, then it becomes a problem. So you need to have integrated planning at one point in time. So all institutions have to work together to make sure that they bring this data together, they integrate it, and then they can be able to answer questions that would never be possible. So that's basically a case for spatial planning. But there are also other cases like for disaster management. If you want to do a disaster management operation, you're most likely going to get data from other partner institutions. So I assume that in the respective partner countries, we have the offices of the Prime Minister, which are usually in charge of this data, rather in charge of disaster management, but they are not custodians of this data. So they need to basically get data from other institutions so they can be able to achieve their mandates, institutional mandates. And interestingly, most of the sustainable development goals are actually achieved after you have played around with this data or even monitored when you basically use this kind of data. So we have our first assignment for you. There is a small Mentimeter link. I just want you to get to that link and then be able to list for us the spatial data sets that your institution basically collects and how basically we can be able to discover that data. So I'm trying to make sure that all of us can be able to understand this concept of data before we can get into the geospatial web services, because it may become very hard for us to understand data if we don't, rather services in case we don't understand the data. So there is a link on your Google Drive, the Google class. So if you can access it, you basically participate. So we have 15 minutes and Arthur is going to help us take you through. Arthur, are you there?
Yes, Alan, I am. I have also posted
So
the
there
link
is a
in the
link
chat.
for the people who are with us in the lab. You basically have to go to the, let me try to show you where I put it. So I put here a link and then you just need to click the Mentimeter link for the interaction. So you basically have to tell us the data sets that you've used before or you've collected in your institution and how basically they're accessed. So I hope you basically have, you can be able to access internet. You just need to go to your mails and you'll find basically a link to this Mentimeter, the Mentimeter question. So
For those that can't get into your mails, you can find the link in the chat.
So I'll paste the link on your drive, so that you can, rather on your Zoom link, so that you can be able to see it. So this is the, okay. So the link is already running on your Zoom, so you can be able to see that link. Please tell us the data sets that you've used before or even collected in your institution or at work. So So at least the class is starting on a note that you also have to give us something before we can give you something. So that's basically the note we are starting on. You should be able to. Okay. Yeah, feel free. So I hope you'll be able to see that link. I want to make sure that everybody is able to contribute to our class so that maybe we can feel at home in our class. The UPSs are off for these pieces, so you can power them down and then the pieces will power on. There are cables around there. Yeah. Okay, so we have some results from our Mentimeter link. Arthur, you'll be able to display them so that our colleagues can be able to see them. You'll be able to display them. The Mentimeter link is still open for you to be able to add more content. So feel free to add more content. Okay, so I'm going to continue with the class. I hope maybe Arthur has been able to, yes, Arthur has been able to show our data. So what I just wanted you to know is we have a lot of data. So that's basically what I just wanted to communicate to you. And this data is diverse. And at one point in time, we shall be able to combine this data. You need to make sure that you can be able to discover this data. So our next slide is basically a slide about how it's accessed. Okay, the slides are quite blurry, so Adrian, you need to play around with the slides. They are blurry, so they can't be seen very well. So Arthur, please put back the Mentimeter and then go to the next slide. We want to see how data is accessed. It's very, very important for us to see how data is accessed. So the reason why we are doing this exercise is to make sure that we understand that there are a lot of data sets that have been collected by various institutions. And then also to understand how it's accessed. So there is this small arrow, Arthur. There is that arrow in the corner, in the left corner down. So it should be able to tell us how data is discovered. So are not seeing what I'm seeing because I'm not sharing the screen. Someone else is sharing the screen for us. So if you can kindly get on Zoom, much the better. So you'll be able to see these, the links are already with you in the Google Drive. So on the Google class, so you'll see the links for this presentation. So if you're already in the Google class, you can be able to see these links, the Mentimeter. Can you access the Google class? You can't? Did you register for the class? Yes? Okay. 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 So let me try to share what, please can you stop sharing so that I can share for the people in the lab so they can be able to see? Okay. So we have a moment. So this is what we have for our data. So this is what we have for our data, the results from the participants. And then also, of course, you can see that the data is so much. So our colleagues have told us that they have population data, they have admin boundaries, they have hydrographic data, they have land use, land cover data, they have roads data, population data, and so many other kinds of data sets. So we also have another slide. So this slide tells us how data has been discovered or accessed in the recent times in those institutions. So the interesting thing is that you should realize that, of course, people are talking about requests for the data. That's one of the most common things if you wanted to access it. If you wanted to discover it, I can see maybe you can be able to get to institutional databases or online platforms. That's how you discover it. That's what they think. So these are some of the ways how really, it's because the answers are really nice and we shall be able to improve them over time. So allow me now to get to the lecture the way it was supposed to do it. And so we have. Okay, so my colleagues will share screen so that I can be able to follow on. Please share screen. Okay, now, usually when we have data, we categorize this data into two types. We have data that is fundamental and data that is thematic in nature. There is data that when you're doing GIS, you'll always have to have. For example, if someone told you, draw a map, somehow there's some kind of data that you're going to have. You're going to have data, for example, about admin boundaries. You're going to have data about roads. This data, of course, it forms a common information framework. It's usually from a trusted source. And then also it adds value to the data and doesn't change like very fast.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? You can hear me. Okay, sorry about this. We have a few technical issues that we are trying to sort out. But as Alan said, if you look at the Mentimeter results, roads and administrative boundaries stand out. Roads and administrative boundaries are some of what we call core spatial data layers. As you do see from from your submissions, roads and administrative boundaries stand out because most of you use that spatial data, whether you're in the health sector or the education sector or the economic sector or the agricultural sector, you will still need roads, administrative boundaries, and water bodies. And I think you see those standing out in the center of your submissions.
But then also,
so
the data itself forms a common reference for other data sets. So for example, if you tell me to create a map, administrative boundaries will definitely be there, right? It's just because it's fundamental, you just need to have it. Cadastral parcels, for our case here in Africa, at least according to the initiatives that we've had. So the cadastral data is basically part of the data that we need to have. And of course, the hydrography, the protected sites. So when you create a map around here, then you have to think about adding these layers. Now, we also have other kind of data that is categorized, rather that's a categorical nature. So we categorize it in a particular category, and we say, for example, we have maybe a theme, natural environment, and then maybe in natural environment, you can have forestry data and whatever, and then we have the data sets. So this data is basically put into some sort of categorization. And most of the data sets that we have that are from these line ministries and departments and agencies, most of them actually are thematic data sets. A few of them are fundamental data sets. So there is a reason why I wanted us to start from this point. The reason why I want to start from this point is just to appreciate that we have a lot of data, and this data can be classified into two categories, the thematic and the fundamental data sets. Now, the reason why we're having this small session is to find out how can we be able to discover this data. So ideally, under ideal conditions, we should be having a one-stop gateway for us to be able to access this information. Of course, for those who missed the first point, the thing is that we need to make sure that we reuse information. You don't need to start from scratch all the time. So if someone has already collected this information, it takes a lot of money to collect a particular kind of data sets. For example, if I want a health facilities data set for this country, you have to put in some very good billions of money to be able to collect this data. So the next time someone wants to use it, it has to be reusable. It has to be, first of all, discoverable, and someone should be able to evaluate and see whether this data set is useful for his purpose, and then he should be able to access it. So ideally, the first way how you could be able to access data is to basically use a geo portal. So we have websites in GIS domain, and these websites allow us to be able to access data. We call them the geo portal. Now, what basically these geo portals do, we basically have, for example, you have different entities, agencies, and maybe these agencies can be, this data can be integrated together, and then you have a one-stop gateway where you just go and access your data. So it's like a marketplace of the sort. So the producer advertises his product, and the user comes and searches and finds the product, and then based on the conditions that have been stated, he can be able to access the information, either at a fee or free of charge. So this is basically a geo portal that we could be able to use. So in the region, we have basically some initiatives pertaining this kind of data management. So I've been able to list a series of links, and basically now we're going for the next exercise. I just need you to pick one of those links, the one that looks very beautiful for you, and maybe you can be able to go to the website and check on that Geo portal. So I'll try to basically do it for my case so that you can be able to see what I'm talking about. So if I wanted to find data, for example, I'm given a project and I want to find data, what would I do? So I have to make sure that I know some of these portals, and then I can go there and search for this data, and I could be able to discover it or maybe not. By the way, 80% of our projects, rather 80% of the work on the projects usually involves data collection, maybe even cleaning and making sure that data is in place so that you can be able to do your work. So as you can see, data is very, very important. It's a gold mine. Unfortunately, discovering it is just like passing a needle, rather a thread into the needle's eye. It's very, very hard. It's not easy to discover this data, and can also be a very expensive venture. So I'm going to basically look at, for example, this FAO Geo portal. So I'll look at the FAO Geo portal and then be able to I have here a Geo portal from FAO. So we have our Geo portal here from FAO, and basically what happens is that if you just go to, just click anywhere on this catalog, then you should be able to, FAO map catalog, you should be able to see that there is a lot of data that is inside here. So this data has been organized according to topics. So there is a catalog already that's existing. And I think also for the regional center, they already have also their own catalog. And we shall also look at that. So I want us basically to search, for example, for a data set. And when you search for a data set, you figure out that, for example, maybe I'll search for land cover. So for Ethiopia, and maybe, so I'll try to search and I see, so there's no result. Okay, let's search for land cover, land. So here is the land classification for India. Let's look for something in Africa. Or maybe Burundi. And then we can be able to click on that land cover. Now, the reason why we are getting to this point is because I just want you to see how basically we discover our data. So you have a Geo portal, and then to tell you how basically to discover, it will allow you to be able to discover your data. So what we have here is called, in a layman's language, it would be like an advert. Someone is advertising his data. But for us, we call it metadata. It is data that describes data so that you can be able to understand the data. And over time, I'm going to explain what metadata is in detail. So you can also check, for example, the regional center portal. So there is something for regional center. So there is something for regional center, and okay, I'll try to. So here is a portal for the regional center. So they have these initiatives also. And if you want some data, you just have to click there. And then maybe you can search by putting the keyword, or you can search by basically using categories, whichever you want to use. So for example, I will look at land cover, and it will tell me, for example, that maybe there is some land cover, for example, for Ethiopia. Let's see what is there. Now, when you look at this data set, you'll also figure out that, okay, they're advertising a data set in this case. So you're also going to figure out that if you click further on this link, you're going to see that it's taking you and telling you, moment, let's see what happens with this link. So I click on this Ethiopia land cover title, and then it will bring me what the data looks like, but it doesn't give me the data for now. And then it will tell me the title of the data. It will tell me something like whether the data is a public domain. So it will tell me the license, because if you don't tell someone the license of your data, this is what happens. The person gets the data, he's about to use it, but he doesn't know whether to use it. So he doesn't know the reuse rights. So that's very, very problematic, especially if you're dealing with an agency and you want to reproduce someone's data. So that's problematic. Then the other thing is that machines cannot understand the reuse rights also. So you need to make sure that the license is there. So we have the publication dates, then the keyword, the categories, the regions, the owner. And so these people have tried to document the metadata in this way. So once you see this metadata, you can make a decision on what to do next. You can say, okay, I think this data set is okay for me to go with or not go with. So that's basically what we call evaluation. And then when it comes to access, these people have already told you that it's public domain. So it's free of charge. You can be able to download it. So you click anywhere, and then you can be able to download it. So there are a series of geoportals that I put there. Those are not the only geoportals. There are so many geoportals, but I put them there for just for you to look at, and then have an interest in how to discover geodata. So I also managed to put some from Uganda here. So we have some geoportals from, rather some data portals from Uganda. So something is going to happen. So I hope it is still working. If it's not working, then we have another case for our FAIR principles, why FAIR principles are really important. So, so we have one for Uganda. Now, I just want you to explore, select any of the data sets, look at them, look at the metadata. And then after you tell us whether you're very happy with the metadata or whether you're able to choose a data set of your choice, whether it was very easy for you to select one. So that's basically our next assignment. You just need to look at these links, put them in the browser, and then try to make sure that you can be able to search for any data set. So for example, if you get to this one, try to search for data sets that are available. So for example, if maybe you have a proposed route, something is coming. And so you see this data set. This data set does rather has, they tell you of course where it is, but then also they tell you the title, that's a proposed pipeline route. and they tell you it's from Kabale in Bulisa to Tanga, and then they tell you the date when they put the data set. So I'm saying that make sure that you can be able to check these links out and then try to get these links and then tell us what you think about the data. Try to maybe look at the data, look at the elements, tell us what you make of the data. Are you happy with the initiatives around here? So what we want basically to get you to is to let us know whether you're really happy with the initiatives, whether we should do nothing or we should do something. So the reason why we're having this class is basically to make sure that we can be able to improve whatever is existing. By telling you, of course, what is there. So ideally, this is the best way how you can be able to access geo data. This is what is advisable in the Geo Domain. So first of all, we said that this is like a marketplace where you advertise your work. So what you do is that you have a producer producing something, and then depositing it here as metadata. And this metadata will basically lead the person who needs the data when he comes to this document, will be able to search for the data and then be able to find or maybe access that producer. So in other words, we have something like this. So we have the publish, find, bind paradigm, or maybe architecture. So this is the architecture that actually guides the OGC. It's the best practice that I've chosen. So the OGC is the Open Geospatial Consortium that basically produces us our implementation specifications as well as standards to ensure that all of us can do GIS free of charge and quality work. Of course, along the way, people have tried to create some initiatives, and you'll notice that, for example, in our country here, we have people that are some vibrant working groups, which basically get the data and they just put it online. And then you can just go and download it. Unfortunately, for us, is that we can't tell whether that data is usable or not. Evaluating it becomes very hard. So we need to make sure that we document it. So I'll put out these links. You can also go to these links, click these links, and then try to make sure that you can be able to access these data sets. So I'll try to basically get to these links and show you what I'm talking about. So you see, these are the data sets that are available. And if you click on either of them, they will just download immediately. When it downloads, you are left with questions, more questions than answers, because the question is, so should I trust it? Who made it? In what context was it made? And so many other questions, of course, that will pop up. So I would like you to basically get us onto this slide. Make sure that you go to these two links so that you can be able to see how data has been put online, and maybe they think that we can be able to access it very well. So these are some initiatives, very good initiatives, but of course, we did not thought about the metadata context. And when you download this data, interesting, as we shall soon act here is, this data will not have metadata. It will not have something to explain the data itself. So metadata is data about data. So the other way how we could be able to access this data, of course, we said one of the ways how we can be able to access the data is to use the ideal way. And the ideal way we said is to use a geoportal, and we've shown existing geoportals. Now, the other way how to access it, we've said some people have gone ahead to put it on the websites as data the way it is. They don't put metadata. When you download it, of course, you'll be very, very excited that you've got the data. But there are more questions than answers. Because when you try to use the data to create your maps and maybe do your analysis, only problems emerge. You're left with more questions. Who owns this data? Whom can I even start acknowledging? What's the license information? Of course, for a person who doesn't care about these things, it doesn't make sense. But once you're working in an institution, it really makes sense, because you don't just use people's data just like that without knowing the license information, knowing how trustable it is, so you don't put your mandate online. Now, the third way is to say, okay, let me just visit and I'll be at the mercy of the secretary. He will tell me everything. So you just visit the institution and maybe the tell it's there or not, at the mercy of the institution. So those are the ways which have been used previously, but the best way is to make sure that we can be able to use a geoportal, which is a one-stop gateway. And that brings me to Geospatial web services. This basically is based on the catalog services for the web. So that you can be able to know that you've dealt with one service for now. Now, the best metaphor I always like using for metadata so that you can be able to understand me is the food. All of you have bought food from the market. So the best metaphor that I always use, or analogy, is to tell you that imagine you have canned fish that you want to buy. You go to the market, and then you find this friend of yours who always buys from, tells you, I have this fish, but it is quality. And it tells you maybe he has this first one that has no labels. Of course, I don't know whether you will buy that one without labels or their own labels. I don't know. Maybe you can let us know in the chat. Just type 1. What will you buy? Is it the one with the labels or no labels? So you can type 1 for the labels and 0 for no labels in the chat. So which one will you buy? 0 for no labels and 1 for labels. And so my colleagues here are saying that they buy, I don't know what I'm saying for you. Yeah. Buy 1. Why? You trust the second one. Yeah. What if I was your best friend and I convince you that this one is the best? Would you still trust her? Yeah, this is food. It's nothing, it's not like just something that's sensitive. Food is very sensitive. So most likely you've been thinking about so many tags. So one of the tags that you think about when you buy food is the expiry date, for example. So that's one of the tags. So if your data, so my friends of course here on Zoom are telling me that we need to make sure that rather you consider basically this one label. And Of course, I've told you one of the tags is the expiry date, the other one is the nutritional information. But then also there is information about what was manufactured, and then maybe some instructions on how to use it. The quality information is also there. So what I'm just trying to say is that even for data, it's the same story. If you collect your data, or maybe let me first say it for food. If you go with someone to the market and you don't put labels, what you've just told this person is that maybe don't buy my thing, because you won't be very sure. If you want to be very selfish, then don't put a label to this food. That's if you want to be selfish. If you want your very nice product not to be bought. It's a similar story for data. If you go to the field and you collect data, whether you were a surveyor, whether you were a statistician, whether you are anything, and you collect your data and you don't document it, you can be very sure that you're going to have issues with people being able to use that data. So that's why we need to basically make sure that we document our data so that people can be able to evaluate and be able to make decisions on whether this data will be useful or not useful. So I'll try to get the next page. Okay. So when we talk about metadata, our data is supposed to have particular tags. So we talked about food, and then we say tags like expiry date, manufacturing date. You heard of those tags already? The nutritional information, the ingredients. And we said that these tags, once they miss, you cannot tell whether the food you buy is good for you. So if you are this person who even cares about the contents in terms of the nutritional information, then it's also going to be very hard for you to see whether this data is good or not, whether this food is good or not. So if you want to really decide on what basically to buy, or even on the data that you should use, then you have to make sure that this data is documented. Of course, I told you to check on the portals. Maybe now you can be able to tell whether this data is like the food that was labeled or it was not labeled. So you can be able to tell now, right? Maybe by using this metaphor, you can be able to tell. And the interesting thing is that many people collect data and they don't document it. But if you want to know what I'm talking about, just get your laptop. If you had your laptop 2 years ago, just go maybe to one of the drives. And maybe you can ask me randomly to pick a document and then give it to you. And then I can ask you questions. When was it collected? Who collected it? Why was it collected? Maybe you give us the methodology how it was collected. How was quality ensured? You cannot be able to tell us all this information unless you really have a very good mind. And the reason is just because this data is not documented. Also, as for GIS, we have to make sure that the data is documented, and it's a very, very big thing. It all starts with data. If the data is not documented, then we have problems. So what are these tags for the Geo Domain? So we already have a standard. You don't have to think so much. We already have a standard, the Open Geospatial Consortium, together with the ISO, that's the International Standardization Organization, have already created us a very big standard for us. And then our partner institutions, rather countries, are supposed to sit down and create profiles. They're supposed to look for tags that make sense for them. And then they create the profile. So for example, when someone gives you a data set, there are typical questions that you ask yourself. For example, what is the data set about? You want to know that. Of course, someone will say, but the data set had a name, and I could be able to tell about the name, but you know that anyone can change the name, and also the name may be the same for other data sets. And then, of course, what's the purpose of the data? Why was it collected? So in that case, we have the abstract, and then how and when was it created? You want to know that information. So that's the dataset reference date. And then in what format is the data available? And then that's basically the dataset format. Then you want to know what map projection was used. So you want to know the coordinate reference system or the SRIS spatial reference system. And then you want to know where did it originate. So the lineage information, you want to know how it has changed over time, or the provenance information. And then also you want to know whom to contact in case you want the data, or in case you want to ask more about the metadata. So that's very, very important. So I'll tell you that last week I had to meet some of my colleagues somewhere, and we had data that were documenting. So I went with this old data, and then I told them, I think we're documenting this data. They said, yes, yes, yes. Then we start documenting, and then for something they say, everything is done, let us send to our boss, and then to a commission. And then they realize, I tell them that, you know, you've been documenting the wrong one. So unfortunately, they never documented the earlier one. And until now, 10 years after, they think it is the data set. So what I'm just trying to say, you cannot decide once you've not documented the data. So you need to document it to avoid such kinds of things. So there are other things like the geographic area, you just need to have this information there. You need to make sure that you have the scale at which it was created, and then the attributes also in the table, you need maybe to find them so that this data can be accessed and be reusable. Once again, let me just say it very simply. Once you don't have metadata, these are the problems you're going to run into. Searching and discovering this data is going to be very complicated. But more so, it's going to be impossible to make sure that this data can be overlaid, rather compared with each other. So if you have data for 2019 and data for 2016, and you want basically to compare these data sets, it becomes impossible unless you are there at the point of collection. Then if you want to share it for use, it becomes also very, very difficult. But what is at stake here? This data, remember, we invested a lot of money to collect it and can't be reused. So we need to make sure that this data can be reusable. Now, of course, I'll go back to our portal so that we can be, now that we've gotten a very nice metaphor to trigger our minds, we can go back to the portal and be able to see whether what is in the portal is actually what basically we're expecting. So, for example, when you look at this, some of the tags that they have the title, they have the license, they tell it's public domain. They have, for example, the publication date, the type of the data, maybe it's raster, they tell you the keywords, and then they tell you the category, they tell you the regions. Now, for this institution, they've chosen to use a particular kind of profile. But for other institutions also, they will choose a particular kind of profile, depending on what they expect this data should be documented to look like. So I'll try to get to, for example, this NEMA Geo portal. When you look at it, for example, this data set, it's not very easy for you, in case you wanted to ask about this data set. You only see the name, but you don't know how to find even this person, most likely. We can check other data sets and see. I'm not saying that it was documented badly, but I'm just trying to say this is what we have. And basically, it's good to know what we have and how we can be able to improve it. So you can check other data sets that are available and try to tell us whether this data is documented very well. Do you know what the data is about? So basically, our questions here. Do you know the spatial reference system? Do you know the format in which it is in? If you wanted the data, whom would you contact? if you wanted the metadata, whom would you contact? So these are two different things, the data and the metadata, point of contact. And then who publishes this data? It could be actually a different third party. So we need to make sure that all these things are very, very clear. So kindly go back to your portals and try to check this metadata and let us know whether you think the data is well documented or not well documented, and we shall see that at the end of the session. At the end of the session, you should be able to tell us whether you think the links I've given you for the portal, whether these links have data that's well documented. What do you think? So, of course, from my little experience, most of the data sets are actually not documented. And if basically they are documented, we have different kinds of elements that are used for different institutions. So that implies that we need to have a standard for the different countries, or basically a profile on what elements should be used to document the data. I told you what the elements are. These are just tags. For example, for food, I told you the expiry date, manufacture dates, and maybe the title, the ingredients. For also our data, we have things like the title, the abstract, the lineage information, or quality information. We have rather information about when it was produced, the spatial reference system, and then who are the points of contact in case you want this data. And once you have this information, where do they put it? They put it on this Geo portal, which is a one-stop gateway advertising their product. So the producer comes and says, this is the data that I have, or this is, just advertises it. And in case you want the data, you call him, or maybe you find it there if it's for free of charge, and so many other things. So why don't we have metadata? Why is it that people don't want to put metadata? It's of course another cost. When you do a project and you tell someone to create metadata, then it's like he has to add more resources to make sure that he can be able to create this kind of metadata. So I always compare it to maybe cutting onions. It's just to pay that maybe you don't want to go through, it's time consuming, it's tedious, and nobody wants to do it. And of course, many times it's just not very easy to be able to get in case you never collected the information. Unless you collected the information, then you really know what the metadata is all about. So we already said that if metadata is not existing, then it's very, very problematic. Please, as an expert, as a person dealing with the data, whether it's GIS data or any data you ever collect, produce a metadata document. If you don't produce it, what you're just saying is this data, after 1 week or after 1 month, when I forget, when my memory does not recall very well, then it means this data is useless. Or in other words, what you're trying to say, when my memory doesn't work well, all this money is wasted, or all these efforts are wasted. So that's how metadata is very, very important. So we go back to our geoportals. We're going to take around maybe 15 minutes, and then we can be able to get to the access. So just go back to the geoportals. For example, this is the regional center portal. And then you try to see whether all the data sets that are there have, they have metadata. So please let us know in case you are on that point. So in case you're able to get to the regional center portal, just type 2. In case you're able to get this link here, that's the RCMRD geoportal. So let us know. I'm just waiting for you to get that link. After, you can take over and let us know how people are doing. So in case you're able to get this link, let us know. The intention of doing this is to make sure that you can be able to see what metadata that people have been able to create. And maybe you'll ask yourselves, why is this guy overemphasizing this? The reason why I'm overemphasizing it is it's a best practice. And if you don't do it, all the data gets useless. So try to check data in those photos. So I also try to go back to any of those portals so that we can be able to, okay, it's very good that you're getting to those portals. So I'll try to get this. So this is the RCMRD portal. And I would like you to be able to, so I'll put this portal here. The portal link, so that you can be able to access it. And I will also put the FAO portal link, so that you can also be able to access it later on. So these are the two links that I would want us to be able to access. Maybe we can also add another one from Uganda so that we have a better picture for all those who are here, so you can also have a better picture. For example, there is one from map.ug. So these are the links that we have. And I want you to be able to look at those data sets that are there and let us know whether you have, whether that data has metadata. So for example, there is this the map.data.ut. By the way, I'm not a disclaimer here. I'm not trying to say that any of the work is wrongly done or rightly done. I'm just trying to let us explore and see what's existing so that we can be able to better improve. So for example, here we have the towns of Uganda. And once I click that, when I check the metadata here, I don't know whether you can trust this if you are in an institution trying to make a map. They told you make a map of Uganda. Maybe you are from World Food Program, and maybe you are just a consultant. They tell you make one. They give you that data set. Most likely you'll have trust issues, but then also you'll have license issues. You don't know how even to acknowledge the data set. But then also getting it may be a problem. I don't know whether it's very easy to get it. The point of contact has no phone number or email, so getting to this Geoffrey may be very hard. You need to go and find the Geoffrey left, and now there's another Geoffrey, and you start having issues. So here they're telling us that we can download the metadata for the layer. So they give us the opportunity to download the layer in this case. Maybe it is, we can infer maybe it is free of charge, but that's not always the case. Whether it's free or not, we don't know. So what I'm just trying to say is that discovering data and being able to get data to be able to use for your project will definitely not be easy. And that will be made easier only if you have these one-stop gateways where you can be able to go and find this data well documented, you can be able to evaluate it. First of all, discovering is one thing, evaluating is another, to make sure that you can be able to decide and say that this data is good for me to use. Now, after that, we have the question of access. You know, you can discover, say the data is there, but then you can also be able to evaluate and say, okay, it's useful for me. But then accessing it is another problem. So we need to look at how data can be accessed. So kindly take a look at those photos, and then you tell us whether you think the data that's there is well documented, please. Can you get there? Have you been able to check? Yeah. What do you think about the data? In your opinion, do you think that that data is well documented? So my friend thinks maybe it's not well documented, it's an opinion. So you can just check other data sets and maybe you let us know on Zoom. You can type no or yes. Do you think the data is well documented? Do you think you could do better? Do you think that you can be able to evaluate whether the data is useful once given, once you're given this do you think the metadata is sufficient enough to evaluate whether you want to use a data set? So maybe you can ask yourself that kind of question. I've sent the question on the Zoom chat. Yes?
Yeah, I was checking this one data set on this SMR video portal. That set is called the Rwanda Sentinel Land Use and Power 2016. And the only information that is provided regarding how it was made, it says this layer was built from Sentinel to global land cover data. They don't put any link to that data set. Which measuring are there some guidelines or standards on how to best label or
Right to Amuna Manager in this
if it's a land cover map, I respect right images they have used, how the validation was done, maybe the algorithm they use. Assessment indicators like capabilities and things like that. If for elevation, maybe some other indicators.
So we have a colleague here. Where are you from? So we have a colleague from Rwanda here who is saying that he's seeing a land cover map of 2016, right? On the Geo portal, and then somehow that's only what he can see. He doesn't see a lot of information. And for him, he's expecting to see how this data was collected. He's expecting to see the points of contacts, expecting to see the accuracy information or the lineage information, the quality information.
but he's not saying it. That's understandable with the kinds of portals that we have, because there's something that's missing. That's why we're looking at them. We are looking at them so that we can be able to see these gaps, and as professionals, when we go back, we can be able to be the champions of how to document data. So yes, there is a standard that we're supposed to use that tells us that once you document, rather once you have data, you document it this way and that way. So we have a standard and we have tags that basically we have to use. For example, the ISO 1915 standard is the standard for documenting metadata. So that standard tells us that we must have the title, you must have the abstract, you must have the point of contact. That's basically either publisher or maybe the distributor or the responsible party. And then you must have lineage information, how the data set was created. At the end of the class, I want to show you one of the metadata sets that I've developed previously for an institution here in Uganda. So that you can be able to say that how a good data set, rather how a data set should be documented, basically. So once again, we need, I hope basically you've been able to check out the Geo portal and Geo portals and being able to evaluate and see whether some of the data sets are usable for you. My colleague here he has already indicated some of the data sets are missing metadata, and therefore they are very hard to use them. For example, it has no accuracy information, it doesn't know the satellite to use. So he's a little bit confused whether to be able to use that kind of data set or not. So let's go to the access. So how do you access this data? One of the ways how you access this data is, of course, we've already seen that upon request, the Mentimeter exercise. So that's one of the ways how we can be able to access the data. So you request and then they give it to you, or you request and pay something, and then you can be able to get this data. Some of it you just find it online, you just browse and then you just free of charge and then you're able to get it. So you just download it from the Geo portal or maybe from sites, for example, the OpenStreetMap data that's free of charge from the geofabric.tv. So that's what is existing. I just want to take you through what is existing so that you know what is existing. So when we start talking about data challenges, then you have an idea of what we're talking about and why basically we should have services at the end. So my colleagues who are on Zoom, please let us know whether you think the data is well documented. And you can basically type from what you've seen. Of course, all of you are going to have different answers. Some of you have seen data sets that are well documented, some of you have not seen. But I want to be very sure, and I just want to know whether you've been able to find data sets that are well documented. Type 2 in case you've been able to find data sets that are well documented. And type 1 in case you found any data sets that are not well documented. Two, for good documentation, you're very satisfied, everything's fine. You're very happy. And 1, you're not happy with the documentation. So please type in the rather in the chat and let us know. So someone thinks it's yes. I hope it's yes. The Y means yes, I hope. So someone thinks that maybe the data sets that he has seen are sufficiently documented. Okay. Okay, just allow me to start with the FAIR principles. Now, of course, we've already seen what is existing. So we would like to put this in the fair principle context. So fair data principles, like I've already told you, this is a new area that is emerging. It basically emerged from actually library sciences and life sciences. So what these people are trying to do was make sure that you can be able to access, for example, publications or access research very fast. So that's what basically they were intending to achieve. So in 2014, there was a workshop that sat in Leiden, and that was in the Netherlands. And all they needed to do was to make sure that they improve how data can be discovered and accessed. And to be able to do that, they created some kind of framework or principles. So these are not they're not basically prescriptive, but they are just you can use them. They're normative, and they're not. It's not like they're saying that you must use them. So they created these principles, and these principles have since spread for so many artifacts. So people have been able to use them for software. People have been able to use them for data. People have been able to use them for services, and have been able to use them for typical files, normal files. So when we talk about fair principles, what we're meaning, these are basically a set of principles that help to ensure that data is shared in a way that basically it can be reused by humans as well as machines. So that's what basically the fair principles are all about. So once you produce your data in your institutions, we should be able to make sure that we can be able to access this data. So why is fair important? By the way, what is fair? Fair is findable, accessible, interoperable. That's, you should be able to integrate the data together, and reusable. So in other words, when you produce your data set, you need to put it in a state whereby the user can be able to find it, he can be able to access it, he can be able to use it, and he can also be able to integrate it with other data sets. So that's what basically FAIR is all about. So FAIR, well, it's a new principle, a set of principles. It doesn't mean that these best practices have not been existing. They have been existing, but now they're being put into some kind of framework that's a little bit easier to understand. So the reason why we have FAIR once again is to make sure that you can be able to find data, you can be able to access it, you can be able to integrate it, and be able to make much more sense out of it. And in that case, you're using it basically. So that's what the FAIR framework is all about. So how do organizations tell that they are fair? We're going to say, rather they have resources that are fair. We're going basically to look at that aspect also. So once again, I told you that this originated from the workshop that was held in 2014, and it comes from the life sciences domain. And of course, it is intended for all data, but I've already told you that there are already research works that have applied it in services, for example, for other concerns other than data, services, processes, as well as the documents that we have. So previously, we've had communities that have come into force. In Africa, actually, we have a community on fair data. In Uganda, we have some people who have actually joined, and they're actually doing some very good work. And we also have people from Kenya, you know that, from Ethiopia, people in that fair platform. And so we already have a set of metrics that we use to measure whether your institution is embracing fair principles of data management. And of course, like I've told you, this was one of the first papers by Wilkinson. So he writes the first paper in 2016, penning down all these FAIR principles and how basically they work. And they create these principles by the first group in their repository. Of course, why do we have to use FAIR once again? They're more meaningful. They provide us with a set of principles to be able to manage our data, but then also they're memorable concepts. And they have basically a natural desire for us to be able to find our data, be able to access it, be able to integrate it with other data sets, and be able to use it. Now, I'll still go back one more time to explain why this integration is very important. I've already told you, for example, if you want to plan, if institutions want to plan, your ministries want to plan, or the agencies, they need to make sure that they get data from other institutions so that they can be able to make sense of what they have and be able to achieve their mandates. And I've given you an example of disaster management. For example, the office of the Prime Minister usually is not a custodian of data, but they use data from various institutions, for example, from the weather department or from, if it's agriculture, from the agricultural department about pests or about crop damage. So they're able to get this information and bring it together and be able to basically plan how to respond or even how to basically have prevention measures. So, of course, is it easy to understand? We are not going to claim that it is very easy to understand. So there is a survey that has been done before. And in this survey, it was the Horizon 2020 survey. And they are asking, to what extent do the following statements represent your experience using Horizon 2020 template? And then they put there something like, I don't understand what FAIR means. And then, of course, one of the results that comes out is that they say, we understand the basic principles of FAIR, but the terminology is often difficult for us to be able to grasp it immediately. Things could be better if maybe plain language was used. So these are some of the comments that have been given. Of course, compared to other principles, I would think that's really, really simpler. So how do you know your institution is FAIR? Is having resources that are FAIR? Your files, your data that is there, the GIS data, both the services that you have. How do you know that actually you're FAIR? So here are metrics that we use to be able to measure how fair you are. So we can measure them in two ways. One of the ways is to measure whether your resource passes or fails the test. And the other way is to measure whether you have actually reached a particular metric, whether basically your institution already can be able to test its data against a particular metric. So, for example, the first principle that we have is findability. You want to know that your data is findable. So how do you know that your data is findable? The only way you can know how your data is findable according to FAIR principles is you must have metadata already that we talked about. If metadata is not there, then you cannot be able to find that data. That metadata must be having a unique ID, so that if you created metadata for example, a roads data set, and maybe another roads data set, they will never conflict with each other. Each metadata is identified on one unique ID or persistent identifier. Now, by persistent, we mean if someone puts this metadata on the web, after 10 years, when they come to check this link for the metadata, should they find something that is not there? So the link has to be consistent. In other words, even if I search it after 100 years, it should tell me that this metadata once existed. So there are already industry best practices that we use to make sure that the link is basically persistent. And then, of course, we said that the data has to be described with rich metadata, which already we looked at. And then also that, by the way, I should say this, it is independent of any technology. It's just a set of principles that can be used for data, services, documents, or any other resource that needs to be found, accessed, and then needs to be integrated and be used. So we say that the metadata should have an identifier for the data. So you need basically to have some kind of identification to the data. For example, one of the identifiers that is used is the, for example, the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier. It's one of those identifiers that are used, for example, for publications. But it's very possible also to have it for data. So that those, the global unique identifier that you can be able to use to identify your metadata. And then also we say that this metadata should be indexed, for example, can be indexed in Google or in OpenAI or Zenodo or other repositories. So you make sure that that metadata is indexed so that even after so many years, of course, can be able to access it easily, find it easily. But then also after many years, since it has a persistent, a global unique URI, persistent identifier, then it can be accessed and you can always know that it's already existing or it's always existing. So in other words, I was telling you that I would be happy if one of the portals refused to work. If the portals refused to work and told you to go to your 404, maybe the data is not there, you can be very sure that data is far from findability because it lacks that unique and persistent identifier. In other words, the URL or the link is supposed to be the unique persistent identifier, but if it's not showing, then it's not persistent. It may be unique, but it's not persistent. After so many years, it's not working. So the other bit is, the other set of principles is accessibility. So of course, when you get into your free time, maybe you can get a data set and start looking. But of course, for most of the data sets, they don't have metadata, so you don't even think about principles. So for accessibility, we need to make sure that metadata is accessible via standardized communication protocols, for example, the HTTP, and they should be free of charge. For example, HTTP is free of charge. So once you have it online, you can be able to search it and be able to get it as free of charge. Of course, when I talk about HTTP, you're like, oh, this is what we use. Yes, it's true. The interesting thing is that other people use other protocols for particular reasons. So when you use HTTP, it is, for example, free, open, and of course, it's universally available. Now, the other thing is the authentication and the authorization. So you need to make sure that you have some way how you can be able to allow people to access the data that you have. So your organization must have this kind of protocol to ensure that people can be able to get this data. And then the other thing is metadata should be accessed even when the data is no longer available. Even when that data is no longer there, people should know that that data once existed. So in that case, you can be able to say that maybe it has passed accessibility in case of those metrics are achievable. Now we have another concept of interoperability. We're going to look at it. Maybe we're going to have a very big debate in the next session, very big one. Now, with interoperability, it's about how well systems or data can be able to integrate with each other. Of course, we shall see the different types later on. So, how well we can be able to integrate systems or information together is dictated by one of, by basically the format in which the language is accessible, rather the data is accessible or the metadata is accessible, in which the format in which you share this information. And then also the language basically of this, how the data is shared. But I'll just give you an example. Imagine you're an insurance company, and then you always compensate people who get accidents, right? Then this fella gets an accident at the river bank. So you're like, get me all the data about banks, river banks. The geographer happily gives you the data. It has bank A, bank B, bank 3, something like that. And then you have also the guy of the blood bank. They took you to Mengo blood bank maybe, and then maybe gave you some, or maybe they're trying to allocate you to Mengo or any other blood bank. So the medics give them the banks. And then now there is the money that you have to pay from the bank, the real bank of money, you know? And then also the finance guys give you information about banks. So you have 3 banks. And then you give it to this unsuspecting insurance officer, the GIS officer in the insurance domain, and he wants to combine it together and be able to make sense out of it. What do you expect? Good news or confusion? I don't know what you expect, but for me, I expect basically confusion, because these terms seem to be the same, but actually the conceptualization is different. So you need to make sure that this knowledge around these terminologies is basically clear. All of us can be able to understand these terminologies the same way. So basically, this metric tells you that the way this data is written should be written, rather metadata is written, it should be written in such a way it's understandable. So you have to use a particular kind of language to make sure that this understandability is captured. And basically, that's what also the vocabularies deal with. The vocabularies are basically they're implemented in the language that we just talked about. Now, you need to make sure also you use qualified references. So this is a very big topic. For my work, actually, I'm just dealing with this part. And we also have the concept of reusability. Now, reusability is about, you just get your data set and you check whether, for example, your data set has a license. If it has no license, you can be very sure that machines will get confused, but even the people themselves will get confused whether to use the data or not. In fact, they'll have first look for you and ask you, do we have to acknowledge the data or not? What should we be able to do the data with? Or how far can we go? Can we even change it? So that's what this license information gives. And of course, we said that should be richly described, and also the relevant attributes should be described so that you can be able to use it. So this is actually somewhere in the findability. And also, we talk about detailed provenance. So provenance information is information that tells you basically the process, how the data was collected, the methods, the processes basically around the data. You want to know this information so that you can be able to understand how to use it. So for example, if we collected a roads data set, you want to know whether this roads data set was collected in a context that favors your use. Maybe it could have been collected by just cars racing around GPS or whichever. And maybe if you don't know that these were racing cars, maybe you won't know that the road is going to be not very accurate. It's not basically at the center line. So they should tell you the processes, how the data was created, the methods, how it was created, and then who created this data. You need to know all this kind of, for example, you want to know whether this person was the kind of competence he really had. So that you can start telling whether this data is actually usable or not. So this is basically about the provenance. It should be very detailed. and then you should meet the relevant community standards. So once again, I've talked a lot, but I just want to say your data has to be documented. That's what I just want to say. And the data has to have a unique identifier, and this data must have the detailed provenance information or information about how it was created, and it should have a license information and should be encoded, or maybe there must be a way how meanings of terms is basically encoded in that data. When you choose, for example, the column names that you put maybe in an Excel sheet, you must think about how they're defined. That's what I'm just trying to say. So that's basically about the FAIR principles. And maybe just to tell you, FAIR principles are not standards. They're just principles. And these are just metrics to help you. Of course, you can just go to this GitHub page, you find all the metrics. These are supposed to help organizations to be able to determine whether their data is findable, accessible, interoperable, that's you can be able to integrate it, or it is usable. That's what basically these principles basically tell you. Now, we say that they are not standards, and they don't specify a particular technology or implementation. So they don't tell you that you should use this kind of implementation and that's when they work on it. No. These don't specify any technology or particular implementation specification. And then also, of course, we want them because we want to make sure that we can be able to find our data, be able to integrate it in an infrastructure, and then be able to engage so many communities as much as possible. So for different communities, the FAIR practices are going to vary. In the GIS domain, we're actually still finding out how should we do it actually. So we're still finding out how to tune these metrics to be able to create a very robust FAIR principles for us. So that's what basically we're still at. So basically we have one thing that we have to think about. For us, we have geodata, we have the geospatial web services, we have the geo processes, for example. These are the concerns that we deal with in the geo domain. These are the concerns that we share. Of course, we shall see the barriers that we face, but these are the concerns that we share, and these are the concerns that we want to make findable, interoperable, and findable, accessible, and interoperable. So we need to make sure that our GIS community reorganizes itself to make sure that we can be able to have this FAIR framework work for us. So basically, for us to know what I'm talking about, you have all the data, but then you have some data that's managed, some data that's not managed. That's the wire. And of course, of this managed data, this is where we have the FAIR data. So some data can be actually, you can have managed data, but it's not FAIR data. So I just want to welcome our team online. Just make sure that you get these links that you can see here. Check whether you have metadata. And I also want to show you from ArcGIS how basically we can be able to create metadata for our data sets. So maybe you can be able to check that before we get to the spatial data infrastructures. And in the next session for the spatial data infrastructures, we hope that maybe you're going to contribute a lot of since you already know now the context. So you can be able to contribute and then maybe make it a little bit live. For now, I was just introducing you to our data and how it's managed in the GIS domain. So thank you very much. Please take your time, 5 minutes, and check this photo again. Check the metadata and let us know.
Okay, so we basically want to show you also in the clients, because you've seen on the geoportals how rather the kind of metadata that they have. But I just want to show you in the client where this metadata is found. And tomorrow we are going to do this practical, like tomorrow is the practical day. So most of the stuff that we're doing tomorrow is practical. So the thing is that when you open this data, it doesn't make any sense unless you can be able to tell where it's from, all the metadata about this data. So, for example, when I open this, when I open the attributes, I'm able to tell, see so many things in the attributes, but maybe understanding it even is not very easy. So this is basically a data set for roads in Uganda. There are 3 data sets. I don't know whether they are right. I'm just like you. You're seeing something that I'm seeing for the first time. I don't know whether they are right. I just want us to look at them and see whether we can be able to use them. I got this from a particular database, and there are 3 institutions, but for those who are not from Uganda, there is an institution, a roads authority called Uganda National Roads Authority. So somehow maybe I can say it's from Uganda, but I'm not sure. I'm also not sure, I'm just thinking. So the thing is, when you have these data sets, you need to make sure that you can be able to find out whether they are, this data is documented or not. So you need to find about it. So I just have to go to the catalog. So I've just gone to the catalog and then browse there. Tomorrow we shall be able to start with this exercise in the morning. So you don't have to worry. So you can just go back knowing that you need to have ArcGIS. Rather in the afternoon, not morning. So if you just click here, you'll be able to see this is where the documentation is found. So you just right click on the data set, and then you go to the properties. There are the item description, not properties, item description. And then this is where all the properties are found. As you can see, there is nothing. I don't know that you can use this data set, can you?
I don't know. Maybe it may look very nice, but there's nothing much about this data set that we know. I don't know even when it was created. Do you know when it was? Maybe can you guess? Maybe not. I don't know. For me, I can't. Maybe some of you can. Now there is this data set here. This one, the only thing that I can tell is maybe it's from 2012, but I'm not sure. I'm also not sure. By the way, you can always edit whatever is inside here, but for now, we are not very sure. Then there is this roads data set that was created. Oh, sorry, there is something that you can see. So they said that this data set, I'll put this data set on the Google Plus, so you can open them and check them out, and then be able to check them out. Most likely you'll see something very surprising. So here at least they tell us it was created by National Forest Authority, Surveys and Mapping Department. At least you have what to start from, right? But no, it's going to ask. And then also they tell you that it has multiple roads, trucks, railways in Uganda, for transport planning. So maybe you can start thinking that the context is transport planning. But, and they tell you they actually digitized topographic maps of 1970s. So you already can at least get some context. What I'm just trying to say is that this data set, which is called UG roads, and these other data sets, comparing them becomes a little bit complicated because you don't know when these data sets were produced, who produced them, what accuracy, and how basically they were produced. And even you don't know whom to contact in case you had a problem. So that's the reason why I was telling you that you need to make sure that your data set is documented. If it's not documented, then no one is going to use it. It's just going to be useless after some time. So how do we, I already told you that we have a standard that we use for documentation. When I open this, you should have realized that there are tags. There are tags that they use. You must have the title, you must have the summary, you must have credits, you must have use limits, limitations rather. And there is a possibility of you that I've told you being able to edit it. You can edit it and change it. Now, these tags that you see, they are called metadata elements. And I've told you there's a standard that tells us what tags appear there. So I'm going to use one of these standards that is found in this software. When I got customized here, this app map options, I can go to metadata, and in this case, I'll see there some standards. And these standards basically are, for example, we have the ISO 1915 standard. This is the standard that tells us how to document data sets in the GI domain. So if you ever see anything like starting with 191, ISO 191, you can be very sure that this is a GIS data set. For example, 19152 LADM, 19139 metadata specification. So there are these many standards that we can be able to use, as we shall see. So, for example, if I choose the metadata standard, which is 191, of course, for us here in Uganda, we don't have a profile. We don't know what elements we should use. But in North America, for example, for them, they have already created their tags from the standard that are useful. So if I say, okay, if I go back to this data set and go to item description, you should be able to see that the tags now increase. If I click on editing, you'll see the tags that are there. So you need to put there, when you create a data set, you need to make sure that it puts the title, put the tags, put the summary, that's the abstract, put maybe the citation, how I'm going to cite your work, then the people, the contacts, the metadata details, the point of contact, the resource details, that's basically the data set. And all this will be used to evaluate whether a data set is fit to be used or not be used for a particular purpose. So metadata allows us to be able to discover, then also to be able to evaluate whether data is useful for us or not. So that's it basically about metadata. Unless you have a question. So tomorrow we are having this assignment. It's the assignment to start with, so that you can be able to document your own data sets. You find the data set and you have to document it. And there will also be maybe a small simple report so you can be able to document it and tell us how basically a good data set should look like. So once again, when we started this exercise, what we wanted to see is whether these data sets are comparable. So we have, you can see these three data sets once again, and I'm not sure which data set I should use just because the metadata doesn't exist. That's what I'm just trying to tell you. If you don't have metadata, forget about Google GIS. You're going to do things, but they'll ask you to defend them, you can't defend them. And more so, you might end up stealing people's data without knowing. So save yourself the embarrassment and document data so that others can be able to use it. Let's have our last session. Maybe we can just break for 5 minutes and then we have our last session and we call it a day. Unless you have any question, feel free to ask. Please open up maybe for people who are muted to be able to ask questions. In case you have any question, feel free to ask. And you can also contextualize it to our country here or your country, and maybe we can be able to share our experiences. I'm waiting for questions from you. Any concerns, any observations? It doesn't have to be directly to the work, but can also be just directly to the data. And So someone is asking about quality vis-a-vis the metadata. So when we are documenting metadata, we have a section actually for quality. So there is a question that says, how do you deal with completeness of data after, for example, it's documented very well? Yeah, it can be documented very well, and the documentation, if it was documented very well, they will have told you that this data is incomplete, or this data is for a particular area. So you'll be knowing it. So what follows is how basically you deal with these quality aspects of completeness, but it's rather not a metadata kind of aspect. I don't know if I've answered your question. It's a question of the data itself being incomplete, but it has also been stated in the metadata, and you know that, so that you can be able to use it to do your work. And then the other question is, if I reproject datasets and they had no license, can they be used? I maybe don't understand it, but maybe let me try to give you my understanding of the question so that you can correct me. Someone is maybe trying to ask, what if the data has no license? Can I be able to use it? So that's basically, that's the only data that's available. I don't know whether that's the question you're asking, but in case I've not gotten you well, you can correct me. The thing is that if you don't have a license, or rather license, it's not very easy for you to start thinking about using the data. Of course, sometimes we use the data, it's just like being in a bush and just pick anything. But the thing is that when there are legal issues around that data, you'll have issues. For example, we have different licenses by the Creative Commons that govern this data. There is a license that says, for example, you can take my data, but don't edit my data. Don't edit and then give it out. So if for you, you get the data and say it's incomplete, and you edit it, and then you give it out to another institution, and then you say it's yours, then there are going to be problems. So you need to look at these licenses that are available, and then be able to give your data a proper license. I have some metadata that I've created before, and for us, our license that we chose was the creative license, SA, which basically says, you have this data, it's public access, you can use it for all that you want to use it, but then please never change anything in this data. If you change it, then this data does not, rather ceases to come from us. Any other questions? So someone is asking the different types of licenses, but I'll try to maybe Google so that I can be able, I don't know them off yet, but I know that the creative license, I can be able to Google them or check them in my email because I've sent them someone before, so that I can be able to tell you what licenses exist for the data. So that's one of the questions that has come up. So I'll try to Google or check in my email. So let me try to Google and see what happens. From Kisa Geoffrey, you let us know whether we've answered your question. So a colleague asked me about these licenses, and I would like to share these licenses with you so that you can be able to go ahead and see how our data is basically licensed. So when you create your data, you need to basically state your license in the metadata so that we know the reuse rights. If we don't know those reuse rights, then it becomes very hard for us to be able to use this data again. I hope we are good to go, so I can have my last 30 minutes, and maybe we have our last 15 minutes, and then we have 15 minutes for the chat. So you can tell us what is happening. So our 5 minutes are done. Allow me to start with the spatial data infrastructure. So you already see a talk about SDIs. Now, SDIs just basically means spatial data infrastructure. Once again, I'll go back to the rationale that we had. The reason why you collect this data is not for that purpose alone, but also for your use in future. So this data at one point in time must be integrated together. One of the cases that I've given is integrated spatial planning. Assuming you want to build the hospital, you want to, there is this finance guy who has information about the budgets, information about accessibility, information about the political issues. So if you want to bring all this information together, you need to make sure that you have it and you can be able to access it, you can be able to find it, you can be able to discover it, so you can be able to use it, in other words. But for us to be able to do that, there is something that we need to do that's more. Okay, so we need to talk about the current situation. So in our domain, currently what is happening is that there are so many people who collect this information or data. Some of them are GIS people, others don't have a clue that they are doing GIS. For example, you find someone has a mobile phone, is tweeting, he has no clue what is happening, but actually what he's doing is actually trying to produce volunteer information data. Then we have so many applications currently. So those days would say that GIS was only ArcGIS. Nowadays, with GIS, there are so many applications. You just need the knowledge. And of course, so many products, we have a lot of formats. And then also, there's a lot of duplication, and even accessing the data across departments within one institution is a little bit complicated. I know of institutions whereby it's the same institution, but the different departments cannot share the data. So they have to go to the field to collect the same data set. And that means money. So of course, for them, they look at it in terms of activities. So you have an activity, you have to basically have funding for it, and people can go to the field and pick data. But these are two departments that can never, ever agree that actually they are collecting the same data. And this data is not reusable. So the biggest problem that we have is we have a difficulty finding, accessing, integrating, and using this data from multiple data producers. So that's the basic problem that we have. So now we want to hear from you. There is another Mentimeter link that you have in your manuscript on the chat. And you just have to tell us the challenges that you face in your institutions. So I tried to state some few challenges here, but I don't think they really capture everything. But I think that different countries have different challenges. So we'd like to hear from you so that you can be able to tell us the challenges. So Arthur, please help and post the link in the Mentimeter rather than the drive. So I think it should be this. So there is this link, just get there. And tell us what you think the barriers for data sharing are in your company. In other words, what I'm just trying to say, assuming you wanted data, how would you be able to access data in your country? What challenges would you face? So my friend, you just go to an institution and want data. Or maybe you have a GIS project, you want to access data or find it. What are some of the challenges that this find it as far as sharing the data is concerned? Between institutions or between persons or individuals? That is simple. Thank you. So let us know the barriers for data sharing, why data sharing has been a problem in your country or in your institution or at your workplace. Why do you think you have a problem with data sharing? So let us know and let us learn from each other. So something is coming. So our colleagues are already posting something. That is good news. Yeah, so these are some of the challenges that our colleagues have. So as others are coming in, so people think that we have a problem of lack of metadata. So they see their data, and the data has no metadata, and then also they think that the files are so large that they think that there is completeness, so talking about accuracy issues. There is the legal and the policy issues that are surrounding this kind of, the data sharing. Then people are talking about inadequate knowledge, so this I take it to be the technical capacity, the bureaucracies, they're talking about heavy data to be shared on the internet, then they're talking about, I think, the technical, whether they really have the funds or the capacity to be able to share this data. And then also the quality of the data in terms of the spatial resolution, standards, and then the poor quality, it's also a quality thing, the ignorance, it's also capacity issues. And then someone is talking about security agencies. I don't know whether you understand that point. I don't know whether you can think about it. So maybe it's thinking about maybe not all data is shareable because of security concerns. But of course, the metadata can be there. So they can tell you, for example, we have security installations, but they don't give you the data. Then someone is talking about poor cartography. So it's trying to say that the quality just poor data. Then some data sets are commercial. So it's something to do with how you access them, the mode of sharing, lack of metadata, the reference systems. There's an issue with the reference systems. And in case you have any peculiar example that you could share with us on voice, you can always raise up your arm and then join us and be able to share. So these are some of the issues that basically our colleagues have in there. And there's so many, there's so many. As you can see, these are just a few of them. But if people start telling you the problems are basically they're going to share rather access information from other sister institutions, then maybe you can also get the impression that actually all is not the best. I tried to check in one of the reports that we had in Uganda. So there's a report that was done. Then they checked, they asked, they tried to inquire. They did actually some sort of research, find out what are the challenges of spatial data sharing. And of course, the challenges that we had, sometimes even we don't have the digital data sets. Some of the data sets are still like analog. You just go to an office, they tell you, you simply don't have it or even it's spoiled. Or they tell you that it's not analog form, you can't be able to access it, it's outdated. And then the other issue that was there is the standards. We don't have already standards for profile standards for us to be able to report our data sets. So those standards are not there. And then, of course, this basically complicates data sharing. And then the other one was the institutional arrangements. So you know that we can have data, but if our institutions don't agree with each other, we cannot be able to share data. So if, for example, ministry, for us, we have a Ministry of Lands here, and or the Federal Ministry of Lands in Ethiopia, and maybe the ministry in charge of roads, if they never, or the authority in charge of roads, if they never agree with each other, then compensations become a problem. Expropriating, land expropriation becomes a problem, because you need to pay people if you have a new project. So these people need to get the cadastral parcels so they can be able to see who is affected. And then they can be able to do some kind of land expropriation. So we have a problem of institutional arrangements. We've not yet gotten to that point whereby we can be able to sit together and say, okay, we can share our information with some kind of understanding. And then also the availability of skilled human resource. So we don't have enough properly trained resource to be able to implement such an infrastructure or maybe a big infrastructure for sharing data effectively. Now, the other thing is we have inadequate technology. You've had some talking about the internet is not good, the files are large. So it's basically technical issues. Either the capacity is a problem in terms of who can read the human resource, but also it can be the technology that's involved in sharing data. And then also we have the policies, because we're going to talk about the institutional arrangements. So we have no policy already that is there that allows us to, rather that guides basically how we should be able to share information amongst our colleagues. So someone is asking a question. Are there standards to guide data completeness? I have not seen a standard that tells us that, that they get rather get data completeness, but I know that we have standards that allow us to be able to record and be able to share data and have also data in a quality way. So for example, the metadata standard gives us a tag that tells us how we should define the quality information about the data set. But it doesn't tell you how to achieve completeness. It just tells you that you can be able to state the level of completeness, but not how to achieve it. Then also there's lack of funding. My friend here was saying that many donors come. Then when the project is done, everything is done. It stops there. So that's a big problem that we have. We have a problem of lack of funding, and of course also the will. So there is the will to collect the data or even update it. So there are people, rather than some institutions that actually lack this will or to maintain the current data sets that they have. So how do you solve these problems? The problems that you've told us and the problems that are being, that we found out for our country here. Of course, for every country there are different problems, but most likely we share common problems. Some of them are common and others are different. So how do we solve these problems? To solve these problems, we need to have an infrastructure, just like a road infrastructure, a reliable environment, that's what I'm trying to say, that allows us to be able to share data between institutions. So we must have this kind of infrastructure, and this infrastructure for us, we call it a spatial data infrastructure. It allows us to be able to share information between institutions. And of course, if we have it, then we shall be able to make sure that we have this data maximized in different institutions. And of course, we have some bit of dissemination and access in a better and faster way. Now, just to give you an impression of what, if you don't have such a kind of system, what happens? So what happens when you don't have a data infrastructure? So I just have a small picture. This picture, by the way, was presented in 2011 at the same conference. And this picture basically just shows you these two sites. They are building a road, but somehow they never come to get, rather to integrate with each other. And so if you don't have this spatial data infrastructure, this is where basically we can get to. You have activities in government that are being done, but once you try to connect them together so that you can be able to make sense of them, nothing is possible. Or you have these kinds of things. Somehow you never connect with each other. So that's the price that you can pay if basically you don't think about the data infrastructure. I don't know whether that is very clear. Now, what is a data infrastructure? Or what is this spatial data infrastructure? Basically, what it is that you have these institutions, but they must have a coordinated series of agreements, institutional agreements, or even they have some kind of coordination in terms of the standards that they should use to be able to hold this data or maintain this data or manage it. And they should be having policies to ensure that this data can be shared amongst themselves. And the whole purpose of doing this is to make sure that this data is shareable and it's used for a purpose other than what it is created for. In other words, it should be reusable. That's what this kind of infrastructure is supposed to achieve. So we have several initiatives. Here we have already the Geos in Africa. And so many initiatives that basically allow us to be able to get to this data infrastructure. And also at the country level, for us, we've had so many initiatives. And in the interest of time, maybe we can drop just a link to what these initiatives have been, and then maybe you can be able to access them later on. So a data infrastructure allows us to be able to discover, evaluate resources, and be able to use them for the purpose that we're intending to use them. And we've said the price that you can pay for a data infrastructure, not having a data infrastructure, is this. You have this tool. I've just used a metaphor of a bridge. I imagine Kenya wants to connect with us for our railway. So you can imagine standard gauge railway. And we're using different standards, different coordinate systems. When we reach Malaba, we may not be able to connect, we may have issues. But then also I imagine that maybe we can be able to connect, we may have other barriers like the policies, maybe they don't allow us to be able to connect with each other. So we have to think about it. Now we have different types of data infrastructures, SDIs. We have the global data infrastructure. I've been able to provide you with these global portals that I sent you the Zoom link, or maybe that I showed you the slides. And basically, that was showing you an interface for accessing this data from a global perspective. So you'll see there's something like Geos or the FAO metadata catalog that we're using. And at a regional level, you can also have, for example, the Inspire from the Europe, for example. For us in Africa, we don't have something. So regional center is trying to do for us something. So there's something that is, that's the initiative that is there for us here in South Africa. But in Africa, I don't know. At a national level, you can also have these initiatives, or even at a local level. For example, you can say for us, we have our data infrastructure at a local level. So what do you see of a data infrastructure? What is tangible that you can see? You basically see that metadata catalog, it may be a set of policies that are existing, and the people, that's what basically you see. So those photos that you're seeing are just a component of an SDI, a data infrastructure. So there are some videos here that we shall see. One just to show you what, for example, the Inspire is all about in Europe. So that you can be able to see. I don't know whether I can run this video. Okay.
They can use geospatial data, such as groundwater, transport networks.
So I try to.
European countries can use geospatial data, such as groundwater, transport networks, and use and air temperature. And each country has its own specific rectified data. But the environment doesn't start forward. Our rivers go through multiple countries, which share countries. This is in times of crisis. The right choices being made. Take Iceland, for industrial plants contaminating the river. Downstream in the neighboring, people use the water for recreation and agriculture. Governments and local authorities need to have data and timely information to help predict the impact on their community. But data is not always readily available. All data is created using different standards. Therefore, hundreds of experts from across Europe have worked together to define common standards to describe and to share the spatial data. Example, the European Spatial Spatial created infrastructure sharing spatial information between government bodies in Europe. Spire defines common standards for 34 spatial themes, including administrative, transport, protected sites, elevation, distribution, energy resources, utility and government services, and tourist services, to name a few. In some cases, information is collected for the first time. When this happens, the Inspire standards help the individual Inspire our spatial data from different countries to share information through an online portal. Users can be confident until they get a need of time. Public authorities will take more informed decisions.
So that is basically about the Inspire portal. So we try to get maybe to another small video. So that is basically at the regional level. That's one for the different for the different countries in Europe. That's a regional portal. But now we can also have regional, rather a national infrastructure. So we can also have it at a district level or maybe at a lower local level, community level. So now at the country level, I just want to show you an initiative that has also been done.
Imagine if you lived in a world with no mountains, no trees, no buildings, no streets. What kind of world would it be? It would be a world where geospatial information did not exist. Geospatial, where geographic information is the data and information related to describing a place on the surface of the earth. It is essential to how government works. Businesses are tired of heritage is preserved. But accessing that data has never been easy. And oftentimes that data was out of date. Now, thanks to one of Abu Dhabi's e-government initiatives, Abu Dhabi Spatial Data Infrastructure, which facilitates the sharing of geospatial data by over 50 academic and private institutions, you can access the most up-to-date geospatial data via an easy-to-use interactive map on the Abu Dhabi Geospatial Portal, ADSDI, which recently received international recognition by winning the world's leading e-government organization's outstanding prize. Makes it easier for government agencies to be more efficient in providing better services. Real estate developers and businesses to better plan their growth. Utilities to better manage their networks. And environmentalists to help maintain our biodiversity. And that's just a few of the many benefits ADSDI offers. Perhaps most importantly, the Abu Dhabi Spatial Data Infrastructure is teaching us to think spatial as we move forward with our ambitious vision of transforming Abu Dhabi into the city of the future. To access the Abu Dhabi Geospatial Portal and learn more about ADSDI, visit sdi.abudhabi.ad today.
So these are just initiatives that exist at the national level. That's the, for example, Abu Dhabi at the regional level. I've already showed you the Inspire. At the community level, maybe we shall see one from some of you. So maybe you'll be able to tell us what has been done at the community level. So that's what basically, these are SDIs, but it's a different typology. So according to scale basically. So what are the components of SDI, the spatial data infrastructure? So the components are, you need to have a legal framework. And there must be a policy. I know that currently what is happening is that there is a legal, there's an information policy that's being developed in our country. I know that there's something that's being developed currently. And in other countries, I don't know whether there is something, but I know that there are some countries here in Africa have already seen some of their policies. They have, for example, pricing policies, some of them have, they have an information sharing policy. So I've seen some of those policies, at least in the eastern part, that some countries will do. For us here in Uganda, we don't have. I don't know what I have in Uganda. We have a policy for sharing information.
Yeah, we don't call it a policy, we call it National Information Communication Infrastructure. And actually there are provisions inside that. It's a 5-year document started, and inside there are provisions creating the spatial data infrastructure. We are on the second installment now. It's been 10 years, but that has not been for different reasons.
So in Rwanda, apparently they have this initiative running, just like how I think it's how the Inspire started also. So they start the initiative, and then they have, yes, so they have steps of maturity. And saying that there is this document that has these steps of maturity defined. So you must have a legal framework, you must have an information policy, you must have people and institutions which basically have the data, they're able to work with this infrastructure. You must have standards that basically govern how data should be encoded, how metadata should be encoded, but then also you must have standards that govern, for example, the access, or basically we call it basically the network services. So basically, discovery, access, and processing. You already seen this. This is the geoportal that you had. This is the face of the data infrastructure. So maybe, I'm going to state it maybe in another way so that you can be able to understand it. These are the components you must have. You still remember we talked about data, we divided it into fundamental, thematic at the beginning. I intended to do it so that once you get here, you don't get lost. You know what metadata is, you know what data is, and you can divide it between fundamental and thematic data sets. So that was the intention of us starting it the other way around. And then we have standards, and I'll just give you a snapshot of what the standards are like. And then we have the network. This network services, we already dealt with it. That's why I was telling you about the geoportals. So for now, you already know the geoportals, where you can be able to discover, access the data. But then also, you know the concept of metadata, you know the concept of data. And now there must be standards to make sure that this data is encoded the same way so that you can be able to understand it. And then we must have the legal, we must be having the, okay, these are not questions. We must have the legal framework and the information policy. So maybe to state it, how, when you look at it, what do you see basically? What does a common man interact with? What you see is basically a catalog like this metadata catalog. But behind it, we say that there is data or metadata. So the metadata has to be standardized. And this is managed by people and owned by institutions. And there must be a legal framework or an information policy. So you get to this, and then you can be able to search for your data sets, discover them, and evaluate whether they're useful, be able to be used. The concept I always use is for us in our own lecture, long time ago, maybe for those one from here. Long time ago, when you wanted the book, the books were very library. And you'd find there a catalog. So there would be cards of this nature, cards that are just here in this drawer. And these cards, had the name of the book that you wanted. So if you check through the cards and found maybe there is a book that you want and you're interested in it, you pick the card, and then you go to the counter and then ask for that book. Then they give you the book. What basically you're doing, you actually get this card with basically metadata that you're picking. Then once you're sure where to get the book from, then you can go and pick it from the section where you're supposed to pick it. So these cards also had the amount of data that was there was standardized. So there's a way these cards were made. So different universities, they look different, most likely. So here we had our own standard. So those are the standards I'm talking about of what should be on the card. Now, that metadata is what has been converted into this kind of thing. So this photo that you see here, this website sort of like, is the same as this analog method. They are the same, they are literally the same. Only that we say that there must be the people, the institutions, then there must be the legal and information policy, then there must be data to which this metadata is referring to. That's what I'm just trying to say. And then we have said also that as a person, when you come to interact with this, for example, this website, what happens on this, on the right-hand side, you have the user finds the user interface. This is the user. This is the user interface. So the user comes to this portal and then basically interacts with the portal, and then is able to find a gateway, rather a gateway. So this gives him like an access to these many countries that exist. So in other words, if you have maybe Africa here, we have so many countries. Each country can have its own portal, but then, or its own catalog. When you come to search, you have this one-stop gateway. When you search, you're able to access, we tell you that these catalogs exist, and you can choose one of them, and then you get to Uganda, for example, and even you drill down the other catalogs that exist. And then you're able to get to the metadata that has spatial data. Now, with this metadata, there's a possibility that you can accept the portal, allow you to be able to download it. So that's basically the concept of the data infrastructure. But to be able to do this, you must have a supporting environment. And the environment is, the policies have to be ready. You must have the data itself, you must have the personnel, you must have the standards, so that you can make this happen. Otherwise, it won't happen, even if you're so enthusiastic. So that's what basically a data infrastructure is all about. Okay, so maybe we should almost wind up so that we can be able to have a starting point. Tomorrow we want to start with the practicals and then also work with web services. The reason why we are learning all this is to make sure that we understand where to find data or find these services. The next day when we talk about services, you know now what data is. When I explain services, then maybe you see the difference. Now, of course, you have the concept of interoperability. When you're sharing data between institutions, there are some barriers. We said we have concerns in our GIS domain. We have data, services, we have processes. Some of them even can be business processes, the way you handle, you do your things. For example, if you wanted to get a leave in an institution, there is a process that you must follow. This process must be, if you're working with another institution and you're seconding staff there, this process must be interoperable. It must connect with each other. Otherwise, you may never be able to have it work. So interoperability is basically the ability of two or more systems to be able to come together and exchange information. And that information must meaningfully be used. Now, when you're sharing information, for example, data between institutions, the first barrier that you can have is that the machines themselves may refuse to connect with each other. Or even the formats may not open up in that same, rather than another computer. So you try to send the data from one computer to another, and then you end up realizing that it cannot actually be sent. Just because the protocols are different, the software could be different, the APIs are very different. We call that technical interoperability, but we can thank God. This kind of interoperability barrier, or this kind of barrier in sharing or coordination, is somehow sorted because technology is now changing. You know? We already have robust standards. It's very easy to solve. Now, the other problem that you can have, it's very possible for you maybe just assuming that technically everything is fine. You may be able to share, but institutions have policies that say our data cannot be shared. So in that case, you have organizational barriers, or you have political barriers, or there can be barriers in terms of ownership, privacy, and of course, responsibility in terms of the data. So that is basically a barrier brought about by organizational issues. There is a possibility that the organizational issues, let us assume they're also sorted, everything is fine. Technically, we can send the file and you get it. The organization accepts everything is perfect. There might be another problem. You can receive the data and the data cannot be usable because of the meanings in the data. I already gave you an example of the bank, where you have the three banks, the bank of money, the bank of blood, and the bank of the river bank. When you bring the data together, then it becomes chaos. Now we call that one semantic interoperability. The fact that the conceptualizations, there's a conflict in conceptualizations or even in meanings or terms. So when you bring data together, you get problems. For example, someone can call a footpath, you can call it a track, you can call it a tertiary road in another data set. So when you bring these three data sets together, then you get problems. So these are barriers that we have when we're sharing information, and we have to think about them. The first one is very easy to solve. The second one is basically not very easy to solve, but it can be solved. The third one is about the willingness. So most of us within these last two, the organizational and the semantic interoperability. And that are some of the barriers that have made to reach this dream goal of an infrastructure. So I've already talked about these things, the FAIR principles, that you need basically metadata, you need standards, authorization, copyright, the policy framework, the incentives to cooperate. The business models have to be right to be able to share this information. You must have an infrastructure, you must have networks, that's the Geo portal, and the shared best practices, as well as support for multiple formats. So I was talking about standards. What I meant was that there must be an agreed way how things should be done. So there must be, of course, this is, we have standards that are legal, we have standards that are de facto. By legal, I mean the law says you must do it how it says it. But de facto, there are these standards that you find everybody is using, are broadly accepted. But there is no law that says that you should use them. For example, use shapefiles, but no one tells you that there is a law that says that you must use shapefiles. In fact, there are more than 200 vector formats. But some are use shapefiles, all of you. The de facto standard broadly accepted. And these standards basically are produced by the OGC and also the ISO TC 11211 working group. Now, whenever you see ISO 191, you can be very sure you're dealing with the geographic information systems. When you see ISO 191, whichever is added, just know that you're dealing with geographic information systems. And of course, for us, we have the National Standardization Body. I think your countries also have a National Standardization Body. So what happens is that there's a way they are related with each other. You have have basically the working group here, the DC 211, the ISO working group that develops these standards. But then also we have the OGC, the OpenGIS Consortium, that basically develops implementation specifications. Now these specifications, they tell us how do we implement. So we're going to implement your spatial web services. But you're going to see that there is a way how we implement them. As a GIS expert, you know how to access data when they tell you this is a link to spatial services. So these implementation specifications are introduced under the joint agreement with ISO TC 211, ISO standard, rather, the National Standardization Organization. And they're introduced there, and then they can be made standards that everyone can be able to use. Now we have our National Standardization Organization. So these guys are supposed to look at both the ISO TC and the OGC Consortium specifications, and then they're supposed to make a profile of these standards. And then this is what is introduced in the national standardization. Now, where is our problem? Our problem is OGC have done some work, ISO-TC have done some work, but our national standardization organizations have not sat down to look at these big standards and profile them, cut them, and say, okay, we just need a section of this standard to work for us. So that has not been done in many countries. So that's why basically we are lacking. So that's why, for example, someone will say, we have no metadata standard. There is a standard, surely. And of course, but the standard that he's talking about is not what is required. There is always a standard, but it's not what is required. I don't know whether I confused you or maybe making sense, but so that's how basically these standardization organizations work with each other. These are some of the few standardizations that are there, all the standards that are there. So for example, we have the reference standard reference model, which is ISO 19201. We have the metadata, which is here. You can see the 1915, which are used to model document data sets. Then there is the data quality standard. So it basically tells you how data quality has to be ensured. So question, this, I think that's what you're asking. And then also we have for example, we have, there are so many standards still. ISO 19152 for dealing with the land administration, LADM. So we have so many standards that can be used. And when you start doing your work, you have to make sure that you choose the right full standard. I always have this common story that I tell my participants or students, because it has happened to me. So I don't want you to have the same problem. When I just finished my master's, very enthusiastic, some colleague of mine gave me a job. And he told me, confidential. So I did the work. At the point of presentation, I told him, I want to present because he said, no, just present. But somehow I refused. And one day a colleague comes and says, brother, the client says, I need the data. So they came and picked the data. I went to them, show them how to open it. They sent the data to France. Now, of course, I told them this data want to be accepted. They said, no. What is important is the data. So I think the French people never understood it. But the guy had done really good work. So they rejected the project and the people were kicked out. They re-advertised. They gave the project to someone who knew the same people who did the work. So all we needed to do was to have this work incorporated in ours, acknowledge the other people, and then also be able to add metadata. It was accepted. So the problem was just basically metadata. What I'm just trying to imply is that if you don't have the right standards, you develop a database without the right standards, you implement web services without the right standards, you can be very sure that beyond you, an amateur will only accept. But the GIS expert will never take that work. Because in any case, they may not even understand it. So that's basically it for our class, but I'll just leave you with this small video so that you can be able to understand.
I am Mo. Good morning, class.
We are doing fine, moderator. Thanks.
In today's discussion, we will be talking about spatial data infrastructure.
So I tried to make sure that
of spatial data infrastructure and SDI in relation to today's world.
Wow, that's great. I'm happy to be part of today's class.
I want everyone to pay attention and ask the question where it is necessary. Spatial data infrastructure, SDI, is defined as a framework of policies, institutional arrangements, technologies, data, and people that enables the sharing and effective usage of geographic information by standardizing formats, protocols for access, and interoperability.
Moderator, what is the goals of SDI in today's world?
The goals of SDI are two. 1, reduce duplication of efforts among governments. 2, lower costs related to geographic information while making geographic data more accessible. 3, increase the benefits of the available spatial data. And 4, establish key partnerships between states, counties, cities, academia, and the private sector.
Moderator, should SDI be part of e-government initiatives?
Yes, of course. SDI should be seen as part of wider e-government initiatives because of its roles it plays in our society. Again, infrastructure for spatial information at the European Community inspired is a European Union EU directive that came into force on May 15, 2007, binding EU members to establish a spatial data infrastructure at the internet that facilitates the sharing of geographic information in a standardized way. Furthermore, Inspire addresses technical and non-technical issues ranging from standards, organizational and procedural issues, and data policies to the creation and maintenance of electronic services.
Wow. Thanks, moderator, for your time with us in today's discussion on SDI and GIS world. We promise.
So thank you very much. This is basically the end of my introduction as far as the presentation is concerned. But I'll be very glad I will stay along just to listen to your comments and discussions. So in case you want to engage in the discussions, very okay. I'm still around. And but as far as the presentation is concerned, I'm done. So tomorrow, basically, I expect you to. Tomorrow we're going to start the practicals. It's totally practicals until the last day. So the next session, so we need you to have ArcGIS and Quantum GIS. Maybe I'll put the links for the Quantum GIS. You can just install one of them. It should be able to work. So I would like to show you how to document the data sets, but then also I would like to show you how to consume existing web services from the different portals. So that's what basically I want to do tomorrow in the afternoon. So it will purely be practical, and of course, we'll start with a recap of what we've done today. So thank you very much. In case you have any comments, questions, please feel free to air them out. So I'm waiting for questions in case you do have some questions. Yes, there's a question here.
Maybe clarification. We aside from general platform, which deals with general information, but specifically platform like the GBI, Google Web Based Initiatives. It's a platform that provides access to specifically by base data, but that the base data also has a special purpose for querying data, for instance, the coordinates, the location where the are going. So can we consider this as?
First of all, the portal itself is not a spatial data infrastructure. The portal is a component. A geoportal, that is a specialized portal. It's a component of the spatial data infrastructure. Remember, we said that the components, you have people, institutions, you have data, the metadata, you have the standards, you have the network services, that's the geoportal. And you have the legal and the policy test. But I'm not saying what the portal looks like. I'm going to start determining. I don't know that it has metadata. I don't know that
Everything there, all those the components there. The global organization with the membership in many countries, the member, Uganda is member. Material actually presented to will then be here. But also the node located in this. So it's a global thing. We have all these alignments, policies, and so on. Then there is a photo, how you can share data there, all this stuff. That is specific to the.
so it's just like data infrastructure for the biodiversity. Yeah, it's very possible to have well, I've not looked at the portal, so I can be able to confirm or deny. It's just that I just know that these components have to be all there. There must be metadata, there must be sample data, there must be the people, there must be the institutions, there must be some kind of information. Thank you very much. So, if there are no questions, we can close the session and we meet tomorrow. But please, let's make sure that we have our chairs or maybe bottom chairs and still send emails to remind you, because tomorrow we just want to do practicals. Today we've had a lot of talk. So tomorrow we want to do the things. So thank you very much. It's great to use the
No, this is ahead of it's frequent.
So the level is not
Oh, that's kind of still in what